Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we sort of transition to a more current issue, an issue that I think a lot of people are thinking about, especially since the pandemic forced so many people online, and that is social media. Whether we're talking about Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, or 100 other social media platforms or outlets, what are the positives and the negatives, the goods and the bads of social media, not just simply for the individual, but also for society at large. And Chris, people may at first say, well, this isn't a history topic, but it really is, because in a way it's history unfolding before us. We could say we're in the midst of I've not seen this term used anywhere, but I'll use it anyway. Anyway, a social media revolution. You had your industrial revolution, we had our internet revolution, and now we seem to be in this social media revolution, where social media is changing not just simply how people get information, but it's changing how people interact with each other and maybe even our society at large.
Yeah, that's social media revolution, digital revolution. If you think about where we are today, social media, the internet, digital, it controls everything that we do. We make this podcast through efforts of social media. That's how we broadcast this. We nowadays get our news a lot of times from social media. We share our opinions through social media. We find good places to eat through social media. Everything that we're doing revolves around some aspect of social media. And I know in one of the classes that I teach, talking about this concept, I talk about this guy who was this communication theorist, Marshall McLuhan, who basically said, the medium is the message, and talking about, communication, the way that we communicate, that's the primary focus of study. It's not even necessarily the message that comes out of what it is that we're promoting, but it's how we're promoting it. Because, Ray, look at what's going on in our world today. You and I, we used to love a newspaper. That's how we got our news. But nowadays, it's this 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news cycle where a newspaper basically is outdated. In the courses that we teach, we go more to a digital textbook rather than a hands-on textbook. And where we used to have the encyclopedia that would have all the information we need, we just simply Google it. So in the last few years, we're really starting to see these major changes where it is, whether it's writing, it's social media, that is now the message of how we communicate.
And most recently, you mentioned writing. Most recently, of course, you've got OpenAI with their chat. Was it Chat GPT? This is artificial intelligence. And I don't know if you, Chris, or our listeners have had a chance to play around with that. I have. And it is absolutely amazing what that technology can do. I don't know that you would really classify it as artificial intelligence in a real advanced way anyway. But I mean, I asked it, for example, to write a one-page paper on George Washington at Trenton, during the American Revolution. And it wrote a very good paper. Now, it doesn't cite sources or anything like that. But I think this is, like you said, it's changing the way people, the internet, digital resources, social media, is changing the way people think, it's changing the way people learn. I mean, there was a time, Chris, when you and I and our listeners, if we wanted to write our own paper about George Washington at Trenton, we had to go to a library. We had to dig through books. We had to read. Now students can do this chatbot. They can go on Google. They can do 100 other things that gets the information much quicker than what we could. So it's changing everything about how people relate to each other, learn information, and report back what they've learned. I mean, I know you've had this experience as a college teacher where students will plagiarize. They'll copy something directly off the internet, and if you I don't want to use the term confront them, but if you confront them about it, they're confused because in their mind they just used their resources, they used what was available to them. And I think that's part of this sort of changing world in which we live, in which social media and all of its various tentacles are reaching out and hitting every area of society.
Yeah, and I'd say especially in the form of politics. I know that we're talking about social media, and it has positives and negatives. But let's look at it just for a moment when it comes to politics, because in the positive, you can find out anything you want to know about a particular candidate, about a party, about a bill or an issue. So the positives is, you're right, we can actually go and find the specifics of a bill that's being proposed in Congress, or we can go and look at somebody's record online and say, okay, yeah, they are saying that they are pro this, but the record speaks that they're not really pro this. I mean, so that gives us the positives of it, but the negative aspect is that social media allows so much political content to be spewed that it can become exhausting. And I always like I like data. And one of the things that I've always found using social media is these Pew Research, the Pew Research forums. They do statistics and studies of all kinds of issues, and they really look at things. And so, in preparation for this podcast that we were doing, I went to them because I wanted to see how social media and people, how they viewed politics. And it was very striking that give you some statistics on it that said 37% of people who are on social media are worn out by the amount of political content that they see on their feeds. 64% say that their online encounters with people on the opposite side of the political spectrum leave them feeling as if they have less in common with them. That refers to anything in general. So what we're starting to find out is that if people use social media and they start to say, oh, well, that's my friend that I've known for years, but now that I find out that we disagree so strongly on a particular topic, now we're finding out maybe we don't agree with them when it comes to food or sports or movies. And so now we have this huge wall that's being built up between friendships, all because social media has let us pour forth our viewpoints a little more strongly than maybe we would in a face-to-face encounter, so that you start to see this fracture in relationships. I think that's fascinating as well as troubling.
Yeah, and people will say things on Twitter, and Twitter, I hate Twitter. I'm just going to be honest with you. We do have a Twitter account for this podcast, but I don't have a personal Twitter account anymore. And the reason was, you said 37% of people are tired, just get worn out, tired, fatigued by the amount of politics they see on their feed. And it's true. I developed a very negative view of the world, where it was just everything. You turned it on, whether it was on your phone or whatever, you turned Twitter on, and everything you were just tired just by looking at it. Your blood pressure went up. It's just that everything is controversial. Nothing can just be, people pick and nitpick over every little thing. And it's amazing, because I think some of these people, the ones that are real people and not bots, they would never behave like that in the real world. I would like to think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they would. But they're behaving in a way toward other people that they wouldn't do in real life, because I think in real life they'd probably get a bloody lip.
Yeah, because online they can be more angrier, less respectful, and less civil because it's online. And sometimes it even comes to the point where the things that are being shared are through makeup accounts. And so it's not even, I don't know all the terms or whatever, but, you're able to hide yourself and spew forth all of these fake things. And as you mentioned, they get put on social media, Twitter and Facebook and other things. And people say, oh, well, that's a whole new look at something. And this might be going off down a rabbit hole, but I find that it's it's relevant to what we're talking about. There's two main things going on kind of in our neck of the woods right now. There's this huge trial that's playing out with this Murdaugh family down in South Carolina about this, former lawyer who is accused of killing his wife and his son and had a whole bunch of financial crimes and things of that nature. That's going on down in South Carolina. And then, kind of North Carolina, South Carolina, there's this guy who was a duck hunter, and he went fishing and never came back. Two tragic stories that without social media would be seen simply as that, just tragic stories, and that are playing out in life. But we would read the paper, or we would have a conversation about it, watch the news or whatever, and we would just say, how sad. But now let's add social media into this and go back to what we were talking about, that it's angrier, less respectful, and less civil. And what we're finding is in both of those cases, people are touting these conspiracy theories and just having all of these conversations about these two events as if it's some soap opera or some movie or miniseries. And it is destroying these families, because regardless if it's true or if it's not true or whatever, once you put something out in social media, you put it out there, somebody else jumps on it and then adds their 2 cents. And then you have this long train of just hyperbole or conspiracy or whatever you want to say. And then it just mumbles up the whole thing. And that's a problem.
And not only you get this sort of circus online, but that spills off into the real world. And I'm not familiar so much with the South Carolina case. I am familiar with the duck hunter here in North Carolina. And I don't know a lot of details or anything. I just know of it. But where people will, see this stuff on social media, they'll read it and they'll go down the social media rabbit hole. And next thing you know, they're out in front of the house of somebody, carrying signs, chanting, yelling, screaming, doing whatever, not based on reality, but based on something they read on social media. And they get involved in these conspiracy theories. And you made a point that I have made 1,000 times in my own discussions with people, in that politics, and whether it's the duck hunter, the royal family, or the Bidens or the Pelosi's, whoever, these things are the new soap operas. It used to be that people sat home and what my grandmother did this, she watched her stories, One Life to Live, and As the World Turns, and General Hospital, and other people watched professional wrestling or whatever the case may be. And these were their soap operas. Nowadays, the soap operas are MSNBC. Nowadays, the soap operas are Fox News. Nowadays, the soap operas is Twitter or TikTok. And they go down these rabbit holes that are very siloed, where they lose perspective on, okay, well, maybe this is not true. Maybe I'm really sort of going off the road here, but they lose perspective. And next thing you know, you've got people who are otherwise decent, normal people behaving in very indecent and abnormal ways.
And let's just add to the fact that it's creating this drama, as you mentioned, but let's just take a moment and look at the emotional, mental, and behavioral aspects of what social media is doing to the individual. I see this more in young people. Is actually one of the things that I'm, researching as I look at my, doctoral program. One of the things that I'm discovering is the harmful effects on students who use social media. For instance, what you see is that about 1/3 of teenagers admit that when they wake up in the middle of the night, for whatever reason it might be, but when they just wake up, their immediate reaction is they grab their phone and look at it. And then if they see that there's a notification, whether it's Snapchat or Instagram or whatever, then in the midst of waking up from a hard sleep, it's a knee-jerk reaction. They look at the phone, they see they have a notification, and then what do? They go and see what that notification is, which then leads them to something else. And then you have the light, if you will, from the cell phone, which then is disrupting their normal circadian rhythm, which is causing them to be, sleep. They're wanting to sleep in class. Their minds are not engaged in class. And then they go through the rest of the day struggling. And that leads to, reports show, leads to obesity. It leads to anxiety. It leads to additional things. And this is all because there is this habitual reaction that if somebody sends me something on my phone, it's coming through social media, usually I've got to check that, and I have to do it now. And that's a troubling thing for our young people. And I mean, let's be honest. I guess, Facebook's for older people. And I guess Facebook does the same thing for people. It causes them to have a hard time going to sleep because they go down, as you just mentioned, those rabbit holes in social media, causing additional behavior where you find yourself not being as active, but being more sedentary.
Yeah. And Doc, you were talking about something falls right into something I had read, and Dr. Jonathan Haidt, he wrote an article on The Atlantic, and this is from November 2021, called "The Dangerous Experiment on Teen Girls." And he says in there, and I want to read just a quick section, quote, "Adolescent girls who," well, let's back up, quote, "far easier to show is the damage to a specific class of people, adolescent girls, whose rates of depression, anxiety, and self-injury surged in the early 2000s as social media platforms proliferated and expanded. Much more than for boys, adolescent typically heighten girls' self-consciousness about their changing body and amplifies insecurities about whether they fit in their social network. Social media, particularly Instagram, which displaces other forms of interaction among teens, puts the size of their friend group on public display and subjects their physical appearance to the hard matrix of likes and common counts." End quote. In other words, what he's talking about is just you're talking about, they get up in the middle of the night and they have to check that Instagram account, or they have to check that TikTok account, and they got to see what their friends are doing, and their friends look like they're having a better time than them, or somebody makes a comment about the size of their nose, or whatever the case may be, and then it sort of pushes them down this rabbit hole of depression, all because they have become absorbed in this digital world that you and I, Chris, and many of our listeners would know is often fake anyway.
And I don't want to be a Johnny Raincloud on social media, because, it is extremely helpful. And I mean, there's been to it. I mean, for some people who enjoy it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that there is danger to it, especially when we start looking at young people. And, I'll be curious to see if over the next few years, if medical professionals and others do not start looking at this idea of like substance abuse addiction, if there doesn't start to become a social media addiction. Because if you think about substance abuse, it's where the brain enjoys those feel-good chemicals. The brain desires that. They want to be rewarded. Your brain wants to feel good. Well, think about social media. You put something on there like, hey, I just got a brand new job, or it's your birthday or whatever. And people say happy birthday or congratulations on your new job. And people give you a heart, or they give you a check, or they put a comment, and you keep refreshing the feed and you keep seeing these positive comments. Well, that's exactly what is it, like dopamine, right? Is that feel good chemical in your brain to where you feel that I got to have more of it, and more and more and more. And so that's when there becomes this social media addiction, where you wake up in the middle of the night to see, did I get a notification? You wake up first thing in the morning, or you can't go to bed until, and then that starts messing up with the whole holistic aspect of the body. And so there is positives, but you've got to find a way to control it. And I think, think about, this is probably going to be the greatest struggle for parents over the next several years is how do you manage children as well as adults social media use, because children watch their parents or their grandparents, and if they see their parents always on Instagram, always on whatever, then the kids think, well, I can always be on it. And so I don't know, social media is good, but I also think it's inherently dangerous, and I don't think we're paying attention to the dangers of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about the dangers to teenagers, whether it's girls or even adults who are getting pulled in and addicted to it. But there's something inherent about the way some of these social media platforms operate is they reward inflammatory comments. They reward, the algorithm is set up to where those sort of splashy comments get more attention. So if you go on there and say something really positive, it may get less attention than if you're saying something negative.
And here's the scary thing about it. You mentioned algorithms and all, and you probably have a better understanding since you're in the digital field of how all that works. But this is the freaky thing that comes is, like, me and my wife were having a conversation the other day about something, just having a normal conversation. I don't remember what it was about, but it was something about, hey, I'd really like to go somewhere. And it was a strange place. I mean, it wasn't like New York City or something. And we were having a face-to-face conversation about this, just talking it out. So then she tells me the next day when she gets on her social media, and I think it was Facebook or whatever, she said, Chris, you wouldn't believe it, but when I got on Facebook, there was an advertisement for the very place that you were talking about. It wasn't her talking about wanting to go there. It was me wanting to go there. But somehow the algorithms or whatever, and the scary thing was we weren't on our phones. It was just a conversation, but somehow, some way, something picked it up to where it shows up in her feed about this particular event or place. Now, Ray, I'm not the social media person, but that's kind of scary.
Yeah, what happens is people have devices. Well, I'm not on my phone, but is your phone turned on? If your phone's turned on, it's listening. I mean,
so Siri's listening.
Hmm?
A Siri is always listening to me. Alexa,
yeah, they're always listening. And these companies know how to use that information to, most of it's rather innocent. They push you say, well, I think about going to Scranton. Well, next thing you know, an advertisement for Scranton comes up in your phone. That's pretty innocent, maybe a little freaky, like the situation you described there, but think about how that could be used negatively. And of course, a few years ago, there was a lot of brouhaha. It even got to Congress about Google and Google Maps and how it tracked people. Where if I could turn on my phone wherever I am, and it will show me whether I'm on campus or whether I'm somewhere else. And it will show roughly where it's got the image or the shadow of what that building might look like. And it will show roughly where I am in that building. So, I mean, the artificial intelligence, the computers know where you are. They know what you're doing. And of course, there's nobody sitting there listening to your conversation 24/7, but those computers, those devices they're always listening, and they're taking that information and using it to track you, to track what you like, to track what you dislike. So advertisers know what ads to push to you, what ads not to push to you. And of course, when you think about ads, it's pretty innocent, but how could this be used in a negative way? I know there has been situations where, teenagers today with the high schools are getting laptops. In our area, they use Chromebooks, but they're getting these laptops. And there have been situations where it has been discovered that the cameras on the laptops are activated, and the school was recording what was going on. The system was recording what was going on in people's houses. And, we have at the college level, we have these new test monitoring, test proctoring softwares that, they scan the room that a person is in, and there's been actually court cases on that kind of thing. Is it constitutional, and that kind of thing? So, I mean, just the amount of information that's being put out there on us on a daily basis, whether it's something we're posting to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whether it's Google or any of these other technologies gathering information on us, they're constantly gathering that information. And one thing I always tell students, especially my younger students, my teenage students, is whatever you put out there, a picture at a party you attended this weekend, a picture you think of you doing something that you may think right now is funny or cute, that picture or that video is out there forever. And yes, you may have put it on a platform where you think it's password protected, but it can get out of that platform, and it can get out there on God knows what. And next thing you know, your image is being used in all sorts of ways. So it's dangerous. And like you said, there's good things about social media and the digital world. You can get all this information, you can learn. A lot of the research we do for this podcast is done digitally. I mean, we don't go to, may have a few times, but we don't really generally go to a library and sit down and pull books from the stacks or whatever. We're generally doing research online through databases or Google or whatever. So there's good things about it, but there's a lot of bad things and a lot of dangers and potential dangers. And we've covered most of those today.
Yeah, you have to find the right balance. I mean, I am forever grateful for some of these social media things helping me with life hacks that I didn't know that I needed to know. I'm thankful for things such as YouTube, which has showed me how to change the oil in my lawnmower, or how to put up a specific type of blind, or, so there are really good things that are out there that will help us. The problem is being mindful that everything that you see on social media is not always true, and that the best avenue for success is always face-to-face relationships, more so than social media relationships, because you never know what's really lurking behind the post or the chat or whatever it might be. But when you have face-to-face relationships, you can tell body language, you can understand tone, and you can just look at the person and really get a good sense of what is being said. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, face-to-face conversations are going to be more civil, less full of anger, because we are face-to-face, and that will always win the day when it comes to conversations. But I love talking about it because I think that we use it, but we don't talk about it.
Yeah, and what sociologists are talking about is social displacement. And they're worried about with telephones, with the invention of the telephone, and they worried about it with other times. But I think now more than ever, it's a problem where people are replacing that face-to-face conversation with a text, with a messenger, with whatever the case may be, and they're losing that that ability to communicate with people face to face. And I think just as a society, not just simply as individuals and individual families, but as a society, as a civilization, I think there are real dangers here that we have to be aware of.
I agree. And I don't know about you, but this has been just a fascinating discussion, a deep dive, if you will, into social media. And what's really exciting is that we're going to broadcast this topic
on social media.
There you go.
Chris, I know I'm going to put you on the spot here. This has been sort of a heavy episode, and it's, maybe at times, people have thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to need to drink a cup of coffee to recover from this. Have you got a funny joke or story you would like to regale us with?
I would just, there's so much. You put me on the spot, but I do think if I can go back and back in the day, and forgive me, I'm going to use religious illustration because that's just the one that's kind of popping up in my mind right now. But if you remember back in the day, churches used to have what you would call announcements and bulletins and things like that. And, it would be those type of things where you would find announcements or you would find mistakes or bloopers. And, I remember a couple of them where the pastor was putting in the bulletin, he wanted everybody to know about his evening sermon series or whatever. And so in the bulletin, he just simply put, and he misspelled it, but it said evening massage, join us at church at 6 p.m. Instead of evening message, it was, massage. And then there was one, join us Wednesday for potluck. There will be fellowship and medication to follow. So, there's a few good ones.
And you speak of bloopers. Sometimes I wish we had the ability to put together a blooper reel from this podcast and things we have tried. Some of it we would have to show video of because people wouldn't believe some of the stuff that goes on. But some of the stuff that has gone on this podcast that has never been broadcast is certainly quite amusing.
Which is why it's an audio podcast and not a video podcast. We'd probably lose followers.
Yeah, I think we're two people, Chris. Well, I'm putting myself. I'm not going to put you in it. I have a radio face, so.
Yes. And it needs to stay that way. Is that what you're saying?
It's probably yes.
But it sure does sound good, though.
It sounds great. I don't think it sounds great. I cringe every time I listen to an episode of this podcast and I hear myself going, I'm like, oh.
Well, it's just a whole lot better than watching this podcast and watching you fly away with how many times you use arm movements to make and emphasize a point, which looks like a bird getting ready to take off to soar to the high skies of the day.
No, I do that. I always have to keep drink bottles and stuff like that a safe distance away from me because my arms will go flying and I'm not sure.
By the way, there's another blooper that could come where it could say that you have to drink to get through this podcast.
Yeah. Well, it's just not alcohol. All right. Thanks, Chris, for another great episode. Hope our listeners enjoyed this episode. Learned a lot about social media and at least got you thinking about some of the benefits and risks of social media. If you have any episode ideas, please drop us a line on Facebook, Twitter. You can send us an email at historyoushouldknow@gmail.com. That's history, the letter you should know @gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
We'll talk to you later.